captivates journalism. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, we have people who are not really interested in allowing journalists to perform that role of being the watchdog and of being the record, the rough draft of history, so to speak. And so journalists find themselves in many parts of the world in very, very problematic situations. So these disinterested observers, who journalists are supposed to be, get into trouble many times because they get into problematic situations, because they are reporting problematic situations, and in the process they themselves get into problematic situations. So this course, this symposium came out of a course we had in this university, an international communication course, and our focus was on female journalists, because we have had instances in which we have seen them either in action or we have seen them get into problematic situations or reporting about problematic situations. So we focus on a number of these reporters, and so the students focused on a number of them, and the idea was the hazards of being a female international journalist. So we did a number of case studies, about 8 case studies, and we decided that we were going to have some real life reporters, some real life female reporters who have gone through some of these problematic situations, who experience them all the time, to tell us what it is like. So we had the theoretical aspect of this, of journalism, journalistic study, and then we want to have the practical side of it. So we have 2 seasoned reporters who have experience in the field, and that is Zeina Khodr of Al Jazeera. She's here with us. We thank you for that. And then we are also going to have Adela Navarro Bello. I think somebody's mic is up. Can you please mute? Yeah, thank you. Adela Navarro Bello of Tijuana. The 2 of them will speak to us today. And so this is how our program is going to run. I will just do a very quick rundown, and then we will carry it on from there. So from as soon as I'm done speaking, we'll call on Dr. Rob Peasley, Chair of the Department of Journalism and Creative Media Industries, who will introduce our first keynote speaker, who will be Zeina Khodr. And then after that, we'll see our friend Gabriel will play a very short video of Zeina. And then after that, we will give her a chance to talk. She said they're having power problems, so we'll give her a chance to talk, and then we will have the dean. The dean is here. The dean will present the award. If we are just simulating, if you were here in person, the dean will present the award, and then we'll take some questions, from the audience. We'll ask her questions, and then after we are done with that, she has to leave quickly to do something else, and then we will proceed with our second speaker, who will be Adela, and she will be introduced by Dr. Kent Wilkinson, who is the director of the Harris Institute for Hispanic and International Studies. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Rob Peasley. Are you here, Professor Peasley?
I am.
Okay, please go ahead. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eko, and thanks to you for spearheading this effort. Thanks to Gabrielle Partida and Kent Wilkinson and the Harris Institute for co-sponsoring this event with the college and with the Department of Journalism and Creative Media Industries, for which I serve as chair. And finally, thanks to Dean Perlmutter for his support of this very important event. I'm very pleased to be here. I consider it a real honor to introduce Zeina Khodr to you. She is based, as Dr. Eko said, in Beirut, Lebanon, where she has reported for the Al Jazeera English TV channel since its launching in 2006. She is Lebanese, but was born and raised in the Philippines, and she returned to Lebanon in 1986 at the height of the civil war there. She graduated from the American School of Beirut and the American University of Beirut, where she earned a bachelor's degree in political science. She's covered wars and political conflicts in many countries. Since the Arab Spring of 2010-2011, her reporting has mainly focused on Middle Eastern affairs, particularly in Syria, Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. She's also covered Iraq, Iran, the ISIL/ISIS takeover of 1/3 of Iraq and northern Syria, as well as the ensuing battle against ISIL/ISIS. She's also reported on Turkey, the migrant and refugee crises in Europe, and Afghanistan and Pakistan. She's won numerous awards and has been nominated for others, just a few: the Sky Women in Film and Television Awards, the ITV Achievement of the Year Award for her coverage of the fall of Tripoli, Libya. She's been nominated for the prestigious News Award for the coverage of the fall of Tripoli through the Monte Carlo Television Festival, as well as for the New York Emmy Awards for the same coverage of the fall of Tripoli. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce Zeina Khodr.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to share some of my experiences with you. I hope you will find it beneficial and interesting. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to look at some notes I jotted down because I don't want to forget everything that I want to share with you. I know you wanted to know what it means to be an international female journalist. Well, there's no difference with being an international male journalist. I don't like to differentiate that. I don't think journalism is about gender. You talked about, Professor, you talked about risks. Whether you're a male or a female, you face risks when you're on the ground, when you're covering war. You can be killed by a sniper, an airstrike, whether you're a woman, whether you're a man. And you know, you're put in difficult and dangerous situations. But maybe some will say, okay, being a woman, it gives you access, let's say, to more conservative societies. Maybe. There are details we can discuss later on, but in the bigger picture, what it means to be an international journalist, whether you're a female or a male, it's the same thing. It's commitment. It's a very difficult job, but it's also exciting, and you have to love it because it's not a job. It becomes your life. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You have to keep up with what's going on. I've seen, you know, people take to the streets and people who had dreams, and then I've seen the same people a few years later disillusioned. I've seen people cross front lines, getting killed while crossing a front line just because they needed to reach their jobs. I've seen, you know, 80 dead bodies, people who were executed, gunshot wounds to their head in Aleppo. Very difficult experiences at the same time. So what we do, we have a lot of responsibility because we are telling people stories. And maybe this sounds like cliche, or we're speaking on behalf of those who cannot speak, but the reality is you are speaking for those people who cannot speak. And in many instances, this is what gives you the strength to continue, because you feel that, okay, maybe I'm luckier than other people. You know, I have to do this. I have to stay strong. And to say that I don't get scared, no, I would be lying. I get scared like every human being. But why do I do it? It's because if I don't go to the front line, if I don't go and speak to the people who live close to the front line, then I'm not going to know the story. I might as well, you know, stand on top of a rooftop with a great live shot behind me, read Reuters and read some news wires, and then just say, oh, this happened and that happened, but without understanding the feeling and what is at stake for these people. Because behind every conflict, there's politics. What led to the conflict? It's not about, you know, standing next to a front line and ducking and saying, oh, a sniper was there, or oh, we just that rocket landed not too far from us. If you don't give context to what you are reporting on, then you're not doing justice to the story. So, you know, covering conflicts, covering wars means you have to cover the politics behind it. You also have to understand the politics, what is going on to try to find a negotiated settlement, because more often than not, a conflict is happening in a proxy battleground where more than one political actor is taking part. I mean, every battle, even when you go and you cover a certain battle, it's not just, maybe that certain battle will not change the course of the war, but definitely it could tip the balance in favor, in favor to one side so that their negotiating card is stronger on the table. I mean, this is what I mean. International journalism is the bigger picture. And more often than not, incidents are linked to regional and international power plays. Let me try to, give an example, okay? Just maybe 2 weeks ago, we woke up in the morning and we heard that a prominent activist was found dead, shot dead in his car. His sister had reported him missing overnight. This activist, Luqman Slim, is known to be an anti-Hezbollah activist. Now, he has been their enemy for many, many, many years, and his family and other people pointed the finger at Hezbollah. They believe that nobody else had any benefit to kill him. He died in an area of influence where the group holds influence in southern Lebanon. And if indeed the group was not behind the murder, the group is very powerful. It controls political power. It controls many of the security agencies. Then it would have offered help to try to find out who was responsible. The security cameras, even though it did not. Anyway, that's irrelevant. But when you report this story to an international audience, how do you report it? Well, what's going on in the region? There were attempts to negotiate or to restart negotiations between the United States and Iran. And you cannot leave out the fact that a day or two before that, you saw the Houthis launching attacks against, on Saudi soil. So you kind of link everything. Being a correspondent, you are allowed in one way or another to analyze, not just report, but analyze as well, that all these certain incidents in Iraq, in Yemen, and then in Lebanon comes within the framework of what? What is the context? And this is what I think international journalism is about. It's not just reporting, because I'm talking to people who are sitting in Brazil or in Sweden or wherever, in Thailand. Why should they care about this, this man who was found shot dead, an anti-Hezbollah activist? What is the meaning? What was the messages? There were multiple messages here. One of the messages are to others to remain silent, do not cross the red lines because there's a political crisis in Lebanon, etc. But you also have to take it in the bigger picture. And even another point, I know I'm jumping from one subject to another, I'm sorry, but I prefer when you guys ask me questions later on. You need to try to give the bigger picture. It's all about context. Now, and then there was something else which was quite interesting, is that why then somebody would ask the question, why did they kill him now? Okay, fine, it could be linked with the negotiations as a pressure card. Look what we can do in Lebanon. Look what we can do in Iraq. Look what we can do in Yemen. It gives the Iranian side, for example, a stronger bargaining power. But it is also what his sister said was that it happened after Trump left office, because they knew that if they did this and Trump was still in power, he could take some sort of action. And Biden, who was trying to figure out how he's going to negotiate with Iran. So it's like when you had a space to maneuver without risking any repercussions. Anyway, the point is, you get this one activist, a local activist who's not known internationally, yet it becomes an international story. This is why I brought this specific incident up, just to try to explain why context is important, and that's what it means to be, an international journalist. And then you have another problem. How do you keep people interested in a story? Because like I said, people sitting all over the world, why should they care, for example, about Lebanon or about Syria? Well, every conflict is almost the same. People can relate to people. If you find people who cannot make ends meet because of the coronavirus lockdown, it's something that everyone across the world is suffering as well. So you have to try to find that link that keeps an international audience engaged in the story. And it's the best way to tell this story is through characters, because people relate to that character. And then this goes back to, a lot of people say, how did you become an international journalist? I was working in Lebanon. I was based in Lebanon. How did this all change? When, my first deployment was Afghanistan. I mean, outside Lebanon, of course. It was Afghanistan. And, you know, for me, it was, wow, that's an international conflict. How many countries are involved? And I was a bit, you know, worried, apprehensive, you know, how will I be able to do this? And two of my colleagues came to me and they told me the same thing. Look, it's the same story, wherever it is. It's always about a power struggle. It's always about people who are able to exploit power. It's about people who have been deprived from power, people who cannot speak. The only thing that changes are names. And in fact, when I first reported, you know, from Afghanistan, I realized, my God, there's so many similarities. It's Lebanon. This is a proxy battleground. It's a divided country, ethnic, sectarian divisions, which allow foreign powers, external players to play a role and to exploit local actors to further their gains. It's the same story. And then you have the Taliban, like them or you don't. They're the people of Afghanistan, the people in the south, the tribes. And this is where people made a mistake, and the international made a mistake, the community made a mistake. They did not know. You can't impose a democracy from abroad, Western-style democracy, on a very conservative society. They didn't reach out to those who really wield power on the ground, and that is the tribes. You get the tribes on board, then you bring about peace. I remember doing a story about the governor of Nangarhar province. He was not your ordinary governor. He was like a tribal elder. And, you know, this man didn't make appointments. His house was open to people. You know, a representative from one tribe would come into it. We watched him govern. And it was a very different way of governing. You know, he would talk to one tribe, okay, get me the other guy from the other tribe. And then he'd make them speak to each other, and then they solve the problem. I mean, his province was violence free for a long time. And then I realized that stories like this show you that, you know, there is a way to bring about peace in different countries, but it's the people of these countries that you need to reach out to and understand. Now, what else? I mean, so every conflict is very similar. It's the same story. But when you land in a country, there are a few questions I always tend to ask the army, the security forces. Whose side are they on? If something goes wrong, who would they turn against? Little things like this, you start to realize that in every conflict, it's almost the same thing. You know what to expect, but you need to know where the powerful players, where they fit in the puzzle or in the conflict, and it makes it much easier to understand the story. And I think what we're lucky with Al Jazeera is that we don't do parachute journalism. We try to avoid that. They will not send you to a country for the first time when there's a big breaking news story. They will send someone who's been there before, someone who knows the story, someone who's spent months reporting, even just working on feature stories. They tend to understand the country more. And I think this is where, you know, we've been very lucky. Like I said, the first time I was sent to Afghanistan, I was sent with other people. We were working on this big special coverage. So I was working on feature stories, but learning about the country. And then when I went back, I was covering the daily news, and then it became easier for me to understand. So even if I went away from Afghanistan for 2 years and I come back, I still really understand. I can understand the story, and I don't have to rely all the time. Sometimes, again, maybe I'm jumping to another issue, fixers. You know, you work with fixers on the ground, right? Especially if you don't understand the language. Do you trust them? How do you know that they're translating properly? Some of them have, you know, left out certain sentences while translating because they have certain political leanings. But I think with enough experience on the ground, you will be able to determine who is telling you the truth and who is not, who's trying to lead you towards a certain direction to try to be, you know, many of them are biased. Many of them have their own political feelings. These are people from the country. Then maybe you will ask me, being a Lebanese, how do you report, how do you stay neutral in Lebanon? Well, I certainly do my best. You know, you always have to report and to, you know, present both sides of the story. This is our job. At the end of the day, we're not judges. We're not supposed to make any judgment. We are supposed to report the facts. We're eyewitnesses. So this is important. You have to make sure that the narrative of each side is reflected in your story. Now, I'll tell you, I struggled once in Aleppo during the war. Aleppo was still divided. The rebels controlled the eastern half of the city. And we were in the eastern half of the city. And we started to hear from activists that they're pulling out dead bodies from the river. The river was like a dividing line, the natural barrier. At first, sometimes activists tend to exaggerate. So I really didn't think much about 1 or 2 bodies in the river. Okay, I don't mean to sound insensitive, but when you start covering wars, you're going to realize that sometimes, little incidents like this, anyway. So after 20, 30 minutes, I heard people were chatting in the streets and saying, no, they're pulling out more bodies. I said, okay, let's go see. So we reached the river and I see they're pulling out, dead bodies. And they were taking these bodies to a school courtyard to exhibit them basically, and to tell family members, come see if you can identify them. Now, how do you do this story? I mean, they're gunshot wounds to the head. Who killed them? And then I just watched people, come to the courtyard, look at the bodies, and sometimes they identify someone and they start screaming. It's very difficult. You have to be very sensitive. You rush to this person and say, where does this person went? When did they go missing? And there you start to put the pieces of the puzzle today, because the family members were telling us that most of them went missing in government-controlled territory, because they're the front line. I mean, they were allowed to cross. Some of them used to cross and work in the western side of the city. So they went missing there. Second fact, the river, the way the river flows from government territory down to rebel-controlled territory. So it's impossible that rebels were the ones who dumped the body, and the body, the river did not flow in the direction of the government-controlled part of the city. So how are you going to put this story together without being determining who killed them? So you state the facts, you state all these things, and you leave it for the audience to decide. They will decide. So again, we're not judges, we are eyewitnesses. The risks we take, usually calculated risks, because it's just not worth it. It's your life at the end of the day. And if you're dead, well, what use of, you're of no use. We faced a lot of risks in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, but the risks are different in every country. For example, Kabul, there's no front line in Kabul, but explosions can happen. You can be in a hotel or a guest house and there could be a suicide attack. In Syria, you have the front lines. Of course, you have sniper, you have airstrikes, you have the threat of kidnapping even within rebel-controlled territories, because ISIL was operating there, and Nusra. So each country, the risks are different. And each time you need to weigh the risks. And I think what is very important is when you work in conflict zones, team harmony, you have to have this harmony, you and the cameraman, you and the producer, or whoever it is you're working with. Because if you don't have that harmony, if you don't look at each other and you can understand what you're saying without having to speak, then you shouldn't be working together in a conflict zone, because you have to react quickly, you have to take decisions quickly, and you have to trust each other. And you have to trust each other enough to say that, no, I don't want to do this, and you have to respect the other person's decision. Team harmony is important. I've been in a lot of sticky positions. In Syria, we were taken by ISIL, but we were lucky. First of all, we were in Aleppo, and we were getting reports that ISIL was taking control of the main roads linking the city to the Turkish border. So there was no way out. You were going to have to pass an ISIL-controlled checkpoint, because at that time they were taking over some areas belonging to the Free Syrian Army. So, we thought, we can't wait any longer. We have to move now before they consolidate their control even further. But what is the way out? Now, I befriended a guy in Aleppo who used to be an Al-Qaeda member. He left Al-Qaeda because he was disillusioned, and he realized, the West is not out to kill us because we are Muslims. He realized that this is a power struggle that has to do with oil and strategic interests and economic interests. And then he realized how some governments use their intelligence officers to turn people into, we have to remember Syria. Syria used to send foreign fighters into Iraq years before that. And the way they used to brainwash these young men were in prison. prisons. And these were intelligence officers who were teaching them about quote unquote religion. Anyway, so this young man who suddenly woke up and his vision changed. He looked at me and he said, look, two of my cousins are married to two commanders of ISIL. I am going to escort you out because if they kill me, then they'll kill you after. But I'm going to be the first one to be killed. And don't worry, I can talk to them. He was Syrian. So we had no other choice. So we went, and then they did stop us at the checkpoint. They were Tunisians, and at first, they looked at our IDs and they started laughing. Perfect English. They spoke perfect English. I mean, one guy even told me he studied in Washington, in a university in Washington. And I insisted on speaking in Arabic. And he goes, why do you keep on speaking to me in Arabic? I said, because I'm from this region, just like you. And I thought this was the best way to talk to him. I thought, talk to them, treat them like a human being. I even talked to him about his mother. Of course, we were panicking because two men jumped in the car, they were holding guns, and then they took us to the commander, the headquarters. Anyway, to make a long story short, they thought, or the commander, the emir thought that, let's use this television crew. They had such bad press. They were taking over FSA areas. And I told them, I'll give you the chance to tell me why you're taking control of the FSA areas. So they thought, fine, it's a good idea, film. So they took us to this, like a roundabout in the center of the city, and they were showing and displaying their weapons. And then after that, they took us to the village, to the town center. And they showed us how they interacted with people. And there was one guy who just went to the camera and said, they're not God on earth. They cannot tell us what to do. That kind of saved me to balance the story that the people were not welcoming them. But I was shocked that this man actually faced this emir and said that. I'm not really sure whatever happened to him. And the emir was very intelligent, by the way. He went and he got his little baby, and he told me, film me with the baby. Then I knew what he wanted to say. He wanted this baby. This is the new face of Syria. And it became the new face of Syria. ISIL became the new face of Syria. Anyway, so you take calculated risks. You have to think about it. I don't know. I prefer to answer some questions if anybody has questions. There's something else I want to say. Be very careful when things happen in front of you. Don't take it out of context. Sometimes, as an international journalist, you don't know the history of a country, or you come in, you don't know what happened, let's say, over the past 2 or 3 months. And suddenly a protest happens. But maybe that protest has been happening and you don't know about it. So this is what I mean by don't take things out of context. Don't exaggerate a certain incident or event. And that takes the ability to talk to people around you, to rely on fixers, to know I can't think of an example now, I will, but don't take things out of context. Sensational journalism. Oh, look behind me. No, you're not doing yourself a favor. You're not doing the people a favor. You have to be responsible in your reporting. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer. I mean, Libya.
Okay, thank you so much, Zeina. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. What we are going to do right now, we are going to play a little video of you in action, and then we'll have the dean present the award, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So, Gabriel, please. This is just a video of you in action in Libya.
Now we are in Su El 300 meters from Bab al-Azizia. You can see all the fighters behind me. Hundreds, if not thousands, are taking part in this major assault. They have now reached the entrance of Bab al-Azizia. We all know that there are walls surrounding this area, and NATO confirmed that they did carry out strikes. They destroyed that wall. Now, for the past hour, the fighters here have been trying to advance towards Bab al-Azizia, but their advance was slowed by the presence of snipers to my left. We actually even saw one opposition fighter get shot by a sniper, but it seems that they have managed to take out the sniper, and slowly these fighters are heading towards Bab al-Azazia. And there is still heavy shelling. Gaddafi's forces, they're using grabs, they're using mortars, and they're firing them, and they're landing indiscriminately across this city. So, but fighters here, the morale is very high, and they are confident, but it has been a very slow advance because we know Bab al-Azazia is heavily fortified. It is the last government stronghold in the Libyan capital, and they are fighting hard to defend it.
Do you get the impression that the fighters, the rebels themselves, and the military that you can see, that you've been with over the past few days, has some sort of focus, is guided, is being directed? There is an argument, a worry that they're not being given the right sort of guidance, perhaps from Benghazi, from the NTC.
Well, no, this is a coordinated attack, definitely. Why? We have been hearing reports since late yesterday that an attack on Bab al-Azazia is imminent. We even came down to the front late last night to see. We saw hundreds of fighters arrive from across the region, from the Western Mountains. All these men are not just from Tripoli. They have fighters from Jadou, from Yefren, from Zintan, from the Western Mountains, from Zawiya. The people here are chanting, God is great. Libya is united. We are united. They're putting up a united front. And this is their fight. This is what they're telling us. They are very confident. You can actually see the cars. They're all preparing to advance. You can probably see the mosque. The mosque is at the gates of Bab al-Azazia. I can even see, they're firing back. We are at the front. And what we understand from opposition fighters who are coming back is they are at the entrance, and they're doing their best to advance further. This is not the only front line. They are trying to enter Bab al-Azazia from other areas as well.
What sort of support are they getting?
Okay.
Never wear your helmet that way, by the way. Never wear your helmet. Make sure it's tied. I have a problem with that.
Okay, that was you in the heat of battle. So yeah, that picture was that your reporting went around the world. I was when I watched it, I was stunned, and then I watched some of the other things you did on Al Jazeera. I was really stunned, but it was very dramatic reporting before the fall of Libya.
It was a memorable story. I mean, when I arrived for my deployment, it was August 1. This was August 21. The capital fell, and this was like August 24, 3 or 4 days after. And I remember when I met my colleague at the border, he said, "I hope you brought a lot of books. It's going to be a boring month." It was Ramadan as well, the Muslim holy months of fasting. And he said, "The front lines are not moving." I'm like, "Okay, that's why all of you guys took your holiday, right? So I'm going to sit here and read books." 2 weeks later, the rebels just stormed the capital, and I had no idea. I had no idea we would be in Tripoli before the end of my deployment. It was really memorable. It was wonderful how you see the people's faces. That old man in the square when he said, "We are free, we are free," and you saw how people united. But we did, this was only one clip, but we did also report how, at that point in time there was one enemy. And it was Gaddafi, and all the guns were pointed at one enemy. But this is such a divided nation that once they get rid of that enemy, the guns are going to they're going to point the guns at each other. And that's what happened. It descended into chaos. But I guess any transformation, it takes time, and it's a bumpy road to reach, democracy. But yeah, these were very memorable moments. Okay, thank you so much. We'll call on the Dean now to present the award, and then Gabriel, do we have the picture? That picture there, he will share the picture, yes. And then we'll have the Dean make the presentation. Okay. Oh, that's nice. So those are the two awards we are going to present. This is Dr. Wilkinson and myself. The award in front will go to Zeina, and the second one will go to our second speaker, Adela Navarro Bello, later on. Okay. Thank you, Gabriel. Let's now have the Dean make his some brief remarks and present those awards.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Eko and Dr. Wilkinson and Dr. Peasley and everyone who helped put this together. And welcome to our two very special guests. I was just enraptured by that footage, and I can only imagine what it was like to be there. They say assassination is the sincerest form of flattery. You know, if somebody is trying to kill you for doing your job, you're probably doing a really great job. And I say that with a smile on my face, but the truth is that this award is to recognize you individually, but also the many journalists out there who are simply trying to do their job. And in some places, like say Lubbock, that job typically has less danger attached to it. In places that you visit and our other guests, many more dangers. But I think it's also a symptom of a greater challenge that we face, and I think also answers the question that you asked about why should someone care in the Texas about what's you're doing in Tripoli or Ms. Bello's doing in Tijuana. First, of course, we do live in an interconnected world. If somebody sneezes in China, we catch a cold in Dallas. I mean, we are connected in every way. And events in the middle of Syria affect Paris, and they affect Toronto, and they affect New York City. But the greater question is, my background on my mother's side, my mother was Greek, and she grew up in Greece during the occupation by the Germans. And she was not a journalist, but she went on to be a professor. And I always remember a remark that she made once, which unfortunately I was younger and I never followed up on it. But she said that when she was growing up, all the brightest students in high school and college were either Stalinists or fascists. There was no one in the middle. And she said what she noticed was that they agreed on many things, including methods. They may not have agreed on outcomes, but they agreed on methods. And one of the agreements was that all information should be controlled by them, the state, the power, and that no information that contradicted power or contradicted their state should be allowed to be propagated. And that's a very common idea. It was in the 1930s. It's still very popular today, the idea that information must be controlled. Some people say that that's for the good of the people. Almost always people justify it by saying, we're helping the people by controlling information, by not having any independent voice, by only having one version of the truth. But generally, I think for those of us who think that that is a wrong philosophy, it's usually to shore up power and to not question authority or not question the state. So we have to recognize, and we're trying to do in our own small way today, people such as the two of you who are saying, no, whether you believe in a Western form of democracy or any other form of government, it can't work if people don't have access to facts. They can't work if there's not some sort of independent checking, independent voices that not only find out what's true, but are able to go there. Journalism was once defined as someone willing to go someplace that most people can't and say what they see, report back. And that is the most dangerous job in the world in some ways. I mean, there are other jobs which are probably more statistically dangerous, but being a journalist in Syria, being a journalist in Mexico, one of the greatest challenges. And I think that's why we think of you as champions, that you are saying, we will not allow the powers of the state or of a rebel group or of a company to be the only voices, the only set of facts, the only observations. And that today is a heroic undertaking. And so we are very glad to give you these awards, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sorry, thank you so much, Dean Perlmutter, for those are very, very interesting and enlightening remarks. We will now we have time for maybe a couple questions from the audience, and then we will proceed to the next part of our program. We understand Zeina has to leave soon, but Any questions from the audience for her at this time?
We have several questions in the chat. If you want me, I can read some
Yes,
of them.
go ahead.
Okay, so the first question that we have is, how do you think journalism scholars and international journalists like yourself can better support each other?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's a very competitive field, you know, who gets the story first, who has the scoop. But sometimes if you, sometimes in sticky situations, especially in war, it's good to share information. It's good to share information with other teams, especially if you've been to an area, you tell the other team, be careful, we saw this, we saw that. You'll save their life because maybe you saw something that they did not see, or you pull your resources together. If you're out to get, let's say, somebody in power or somebody who has been abusing power, sometimes you have to not have this selfish, competitive nature. You have to put that aside. This is not about me anymore. This is because it's a very competitive field. You will see that one day when you guys start working for TV channels, even your own colleagues sometimes will fight you over a live. Yeah, so if you pull your resources together, then you become stronger, even in some areas, or, you know, like yesterday, just one example quickly, in Lebanon, MPs were not supposed to be vaccinated before the people, but one journalist found out, got a tip, he put it on Twitter, he pulled the resources together with other journalists made other phone calls, and then they exposed the corruption at parliament. So sometimes it's much better when you work together, you all become stronger.
Okay, Gabriel, we'll take that one last question, please.
Of course. Okay, I will select one of. There is a lot of questions, a lot of interesting questions here. So, as an international journalist, how do you balance between wanting to know the cultural context on one hand and knowing that you know enough to finalize the story on the other hand?
Look, you have to respect people's cultures. You have to tolerate, you have to be open-minded. You don't go to a place or go to cover a certain story with preconceived ideas in your mind. You don't say, you know, I always have this problem with the planning department or with anybody. They tell me, what are you going to film? What is the story about? I said, I'm not going to tell you. I don't know. I want to go and find out what the story. What if I tell you this is my story and then I go just focus on this angle and I miss the real story, which is supposed to be in front of me? Have faith to know that when you reach somewhere, you will find the story, you will understand people, and enough experience, you're going to know who's lying and who's not lying. And anyway, you have to be very careful in what you present to the world. You have to make sure that you're not talking to an irresponsible person who's not reflective of reality. One example, we were waiting for the first Syrian refugee to be inoculated as part of Lebanon's vaccination campaign. Then I realized, why am I waiting for that? The fact that none of them have been vaccinated is the story. So I picked up the phone and I called the UN and the health ministry and I said, you guys are taking us for a ride. You're telling me, wait, we're going to tell you when the first refugee is going to be inoculated. It's week 2 of the vaccination campaign. They should have been given this opportunity by now. So the lead automatically changes. So don't have preconceived ideas. Don't plan what you're going to do. You are smart enough to see the story once you get there.
Okay, thank you. Our time is almost up. I will take this one question.
Yes.
What has been the emotional impact of reporting on war on you? This is from Professor Senadori.
Yeah, okay. So many people say you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you are hyper, I've been always hyper since I was a kid. I don't think I'm suffering from PTSD or anything like that, but undoubtedly you're just more stressed and anxiety. The Beirut port explosion was more than enough. That explosion, I was not even in the front line, I was 3 kilometers away. I could imagine, I know what happened to people who were in front of that port. But I was with my 3-year-old son. Up to today, he can't walk down that street. He looks at me and he says, Mommy, no explosion. Mommy, no explosion. I saw the pressure wave. I actually saw it. And we were pushed to the ground and the glass was falling everywhere around us. And I've seen a lot in life, but that was something else. And the worst part was you had a kid with you, your kid, and my mother. My mother panicked. I took the picture and I called the desk and tweeted it. She practically hit me for doing that. But you know what? Sometimes you have to do that. I had to stay sane. I had to stay sane on the phone to get her and my son back home. And that's what I did. Now you tell me, yeah, maybe sometimes when it's really quiet, I imagine that sound again. Yes. But am I crazy? No. it's a difficult job. You see a lot, and you see injustice, a lot of injustice. Then you ask yourself, why do I have and others don't? Why am I able to buy my kids something and others can't? It affects your life. But at the same time, you say, well, I've been given this something that I can speak on their behalf, which kind of balances things out.
How do you balance your life as a parent, a mother, and a reporter?
Well, my son can say the government is bad and corrupt, and he's 3 years old. Let me put it that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Zeina.
I'm trying. I do my best. I have help at home. I have my mom. My husband also works in the media, but in the technical side. I try not to travel as much as before. And with the pandemic now, and Lebanon is really busy. And so it's hard, but it can be done.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You.
Understand you have to leave, but you'll be back with us when you have the time. Okay, thank you. It was a wonderful pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
This. Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all the best. And we'll keep watching your reporting. Yes, I watched your reporting on Lebanon, on the death of Slim, on the murder.
Yeah, today we have a new package on. We did it this morning about the terrorism charges leveled on protesters, which is kind of a first. It's pretty bad. Okay. Terrorism. They accuse protesters who threw Molotov cocktails terrorism. Okay. This is the Arab world for you. Okay. Anyway. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay?
Bye-bye.
All the best. We'll keep in touch. And we'll find a way of getting that award over to you in Lebanon.
No problem. No problem.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are so glad that Zeina joined us. We will move to the next stage of our program. I will call on Professor Kent Wilkinson, the director of the Harris Institute for Hispanic and International Communication, to introduce our next speaker, who will be Adela Navarro Bello. She's from the Zeta magazine in Tijuana, Mexico. As soon as Kent introduces her, we will watch a little video of her from Gabrielle. Over to you, Professor Wilkinson.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Eko. And let me start with some thanks as well to you and your students from the International Communication Seminar last fall for coming up with this idea, which I think is great. We're off to a really good start. We're really looking forward to hearing from Ms. Navarro shortly, and also from the students this afternoon to hear your work. So thanks for all of your efforts. Also to the Journalism and Creative Media Industries Department and the Dean's Office for their support in this. A special thanks to Gabriel Dominguez Partida for stepping in to do the coordination on this. He's the Assistant Director of the Harris Institute. We really appreciate all your efforts at a busy time, Gabriel. And then I also just want to recognize and make a shout out to the students who are all attending here. We know you're spending a ton of time on screens, and we very much appreciate your putting some more time and attention into this program. It's part of our effort to have co-curricular events that really sort of reinforce the stuff that you're learning in the classroom, and particularly for those of you studying journalism and thinking about international careers. We really hope that the insights from our guests today really help sort of give you some clarity on what you might expect if you do go into this really important and dynamic field. So it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Adela Navarro Bello, who is the General Director of Zeta magazine in Tijuana, in Northern California, on the border with San Diego, or very close, as I hope most of you know. She is an award-winning investigative journalist, as I mentioned, Director General of Zeta, where she's been employed since 1990. Zeta is famous for its high-risk reporting on organized crime, drug trafficking, and corruption in Mexico's border cities. Multiple editors and reporters working for Zeta have been murdered. This has not deterred Navarro. She has had a distinguished career covering major crises like the Chiapas conflict, corruption in the ruling PRI, or Institutional Revolutionary Party, and later the PAN, or National Action Party. Despite pressures from corrupt government officials and drug cartels, her motto is, "Every time a journalist self-censors, the whole society loses." In 1994, Navarro became the first woman on Zeta's 5-person editorial board. In January of 2010, US law enforcement notified Navarro of death threats from the Tijuana cartel, causing the Mexican government to assign her 7 soldiers as bodyguards. Navarro has won multiple awards, including the International Press Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists and the International Women's Media Foundation Courage in Journalism Award. We thank Ms. Navarro for her essential work in this dangerous context, and also for taking the time out of her busy schedule to speak with us today. So as Dr. Eko said, we're going to see a short video, and then we'll be back with some remarks from the Dean and presentation of the award before we hear directly from Ms. Navarro. Thank you.
Tengo 24 años ejerciendo el periodismo, no es un accidente, es algo que decidí después de analizar las opciones que había para mí, para mis inquietudes, mi compromiso con mi sociedad en Baja California, con México. Combino mi pasión por la escritura, que me gusta mucho escribir, con esta defensa, con abonarle a la justicia social a partir del periodismo de investigación, el periodismo libre, el periodismo independiente, y así es como me convierto en periodista y así es como llego al semanario Zeta. Desde nuestra trinchera, los periodistas que trabajamos y que me honro encabezar en el semanario junto a César René Blanco, hemos abonado y hemos puesto de nuestra parte para hacer de Baja California y de nuestro país un mejor ambiente para vivir. Nos enfrentamos a las noticias del crimen organizado, del narcotráfico. Hemos sido vulnerados en nuestra vida, hemos sido amenazados. Nosotros tenemos información que nosotros tenemos que publicar. Si no la publico, quiere decir que estoy siendo cómplice de algo o que estoy apoyando esta impunidad. Entonces, esa es nuestra principal protección, es publicar lo que sabemos a partir de nuestras investigaciones periodísticas. No somos víctimas, tampoco nos queremos asumir como víctimas. Nosotros ejercemos el periodismo porque es nuestra pasión, porque es lo que nos gusta hacer, porque es lo que sabemos hacer. Tenemos un determinado perfil para estar en este medio, ¿no? Y un compromiso muy fuerte, no solo con nuestra profesión, que es el ejercicio del periodismo de investigación, sino con la sociedad en la que nos desarrollamos y que nos apoya a través de la confianza, ¿no?, en lo que nosotros publicamos.
Adela, ¿qué representa para ti el haber sido reconocida como una de las mujeres más valientes este año en el mundo entero a través de la organización IWMF?
Es un reconocimiento a todas las mujeres que en mi país, México, a pesar de las circunstancias de violencia, no abandonan sus trincheras laborales en el ámbito periodístico y siguen adelante. Tengo 24 años ejerciendo el periodismo.
Okay, we will let's have the Dean. Yeah, Dean Permuda, are you there? Okay. Those are the awards we are going to present. Dr. Wilkinson is holding the award we are going to present to Adela Navarro Bello, and so we'll call on the Dean to make a few remarks about the award we are going to give it. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we want to thank very much our visitors. We hope that one day you will be able to visit us in person, and we will try to make that happen maybe next year, as I hope this event grows. Just to reiterate that we are just so glad to have people who are such role models for not only the craft of journalism, but also the kind of deep thought and thinking and intellectual input that needs to go into making story choices. So thank you again, and let's continue with the program.
Thank you, sir. We'll have our speaker. Kent, could you call on our speaker if she's around.
Yes, Ms. Navarro?
Hello, I'm here.
We're hearing you. Great.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I agree, this is not a matter of gender. When a death threat came, it's not a matter if you're a woman or you're a man. You're a journalist, and they want to silence you. They want to shoot you down. So I'm gonna speak to you about the context that we are living in Mexico while we are doing investigative journalism. In Mexico, we are experiencing a time of darkness. Everyday freedom of expression is threatened by the federal government as well as by local governments. And of course, by organized crime. That, because of obvious impunity and corruption, constitute an illicit power ever so present in our society nowadays. Doing investigative journalism in my country means looking for enemies. If corruption in government is investigated, the highest ranking public officials involved consider the journalist his adversary. If a drug trafficking network is investigated, the criminal want to kill the messenger in order to preserve their impunity. There are no safety measures while reporting on corruption in the government or the impunity of the mafia. Journalists end up in the list of the cases accused, singled out, revealed, discredit, ruin, and in the worst case scenario, murdered, persecuted. They might even disappear without a trace. This is not a new scenario. This has been happening for at least 21 years. Between 20,000 and February of 2021, over 100 journalists were killed in my country. And in 2020, according to the Committee to Protect Journalism, 30 journalists were murdered in Mexico. 21 of those cases were resolved. A homicide was committed as a result of the victim's news reporting. 99% of these crimes have not yet been resolved. The law enforcement authorities, whether at national or local levels, do not investigate the causes of the homicides, nor the material perpetrators, much less the intellectual ones. There have been few cases where justice has actually made progress. For example, regarding Javier Valdez in Sinaloa in 2015 and Miroslava Bridge in 2017. The measures, and I have reiterated this for the past 20 years, is very clear. In Mexico, you can murder a journalist and not end up in jail. Despite this climate, in Mexico, there are journalists who do not give up practicing freedom of expression, particularly in the States, where there is usually more impunity for both authorities and criminals. At Zeta, we have been exercising this right for 40 years, and it has not been easy road. 3 murderers, an attack, and multiple threats have violated our editorial team. But more than burdening ourselves with this, in the face of impunity, we defend free and investigative journalists every week. We denounce, we point out, we demand justice for us and for the society that we live in. In 1988, we faced our first murder case. Hector Felix Miranda, one of the 2 founding directors. In 1997, this happened a second time. Jesus Blanco Cornelas, also a founding director, survived the attack against him in which he was shot 4 times. His bodyguard and driver wasn't so lucky. The 3rd homicide occurred in 2004 when our editor-in-chief, Francisco Javier Ortiz Franco, was assassinated. In all of these cases, organized crime was the trigger for those vicious attacks on journalists. In 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2017, we received threats from 2 drug cartels whose criminal power is based on the northern border of Mexico and the southern border of the United States. So far, we resist the direct aggressions of the government, We had a first incident in 1980 when the PRI, as the ruling party and in remaining power for 80 years, tried to close our access to information and stop the distribution of Zeta. The government also attacked us in 2013, 2014, and 2016. On that occasion, the culprit was a PAN government, the right-wing party that ruled in Mexico for 12 years. Today, the attacks on our weekly Zeta come from a government struck from Morena, the populist left-wing party founded by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador in 2014. The attacks from November 2019 and to July 2020 towards the weekly were counted at 16 by Article 19, the Organization for the Protection of Journalists. The method is usually the same. Verbal attacks by the government towards the journalists of the weekly that reports corruption. The purpose of these public officials involved is to morally attack us, discredit our work, and stop its distribution. And these attacks are not limited to political ideologies or parties. As I have explained to you, 3 governments of different political affiliations have attacked us doing our jobs, investigated journalism. Currently, López Obrador governments from his presidential pulpit attacks the press practically every day, from national newspaper and independent journalists who in the past pointed out the acts of corruption of previous governments and who today out their own wrongdoings. López Obrador attacks them in a way that is troublesome and frankly worrying. He calls them his adversaries, hidden journalism, members of the mafia in power, and in the list of the cases, liberals who oppose his government. This polarization that has been promoted every day of his president has managed to impact social networks, although it has not stopped journalist investigation that reports on current corruption. Despite the populist and authoritarian personality of the man who currently governs Mexico and the danger of being violated by a drug cartel organizations, courage journalists continue to investigate and publish their findings. The origin of the problem of violence and crime in Mexico is corruption that gives out impunity. We have had institutions infiltrated by drug cartels dating back 6 years, and law enforcement agencies incapable of prosecuting all the crimes that are committed in the country. In 2020, more than 32,000 murders were recorded in this country. The failure of the police added to an inefficient administration of justice and a null exercise of the rule of law is the combination that not only has violated journalists, but also citizens. In this adverse scenario, we must add opacity. Increasingly, the government's monopolized information, seals it and reserve it, make it unavailable to all citizens. Ultimately, President López is trying by legislative means to close access to public information and end transparency, arguing that he's a non-corrupt government, when in his own family, that is not so. In this sense, investigative journalists face obstacles when researching information, but investigative journalism in Mexico is not impossible. Many government entities, citizens, civil society institutions, and some autonomous bodies that serve as a link between government and society release information to those who seek to publish it. Fortunately, we are not the only ones who do this at Zeta. There are media outlets in other states and in the central region of Mexico joining in on this effort while participating in individual and collective work groups. In this way are developing journalist investigations to reveal what the government wants to hide: corruption, abuse, impunity, diversion of resources, complicity with organized crime, among other topics, society needs to be aware of. Government change, the power of political party also shifts, but true journalists are still here, investigating with any other goal than to keep freedom of expression and journalists alive, and confront the public agenda of a government, which no matter its origin, will want to exercise its power to pressure the free, independent press. Like us in Zeta, where we have been practicing journalism for 40 years, and in spite of threats and attacks, we will continue doing so as long as society craves a reliable source of information, mistrusts the government, believes in democracy and freedom of expression, and trusts this is the way to transform a country for the better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to remind folks that they can ask questions in the chat. We strongly encourage you to do so. I'm going to start with kind of a difficult one sometimes for us on the north side of the Rio Grande, and that is I wonder if you could share with us what you see as sort of the United States complicity in some of these dynamics that are happening in Mexico, because I think there's a tendency to say, oh, well, that's just, you know, happening there, but certainly the demand for drugs is fueling this. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what do you see as sort of the U.S. role in some of these challenges that you're talking about, and what might need to change in terms of the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico to move towards some improvement?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's a binational problem, the drug trade, the drug cartels. There has been a lot of investigation in both borders. For example, right here in Tijuana and San Diego, California, they have been conducting investigation between the two cities, and sometimes it's for good, but I think in a national perspective, there has not been an agree for governments. In the past, we have the Merida Initiative, where the government of the U.S. sent us support through either money or strategy to combat the drug cartels. But when in Mexico, the government changed, the public policy changed too. And they do not have the same agreement with the government of the US. And there is some things or some strategies from the government that had failed from the government from the US that had failed in Mexico, like the armed trafficking. They put arms in the border of Mexico to be introduced to this country, and they supposed to go in to track the arms to see where is the path or where is the cartels who are involved in armed trafficking, but it went well, and much of those arms were used to kill Mexican people, even U.S. official. I think there is, until now, there is no strategy that had functioned well.
Okay, thank you. Another appeal for questions, particularly from students. You know, a lot of this was organized for you, thinking about, you know, your career opportunities and learning more from working journalists in the field like Ms. Navarro. Let me ask another question. El Chapo's wife has been implicated in his you know, narco trafficking activities. I'm just wondering what is sort of your observation of that development in the case and sort of how the media is handling it in Mexico. Here, you know, the news agenda is pretty filled with other things, and it's probably not getting the same attention that it might, you know, at a different time. But what's sort of the Mexican perspective on that? And is it really an important development in terms of sort of the battle against narco trafficking?
Yes, I think the same occurred right here in Mexico. We have another issues or more relevant issues like the economical crisis or the health crisis by the pandemic in the world. But, you know, they are criminals. They are a network of criminals. Their families are criminals. El Chapo has his kids, like 4 kids, he's in the drug trade. And some women in the drug trade. I think his wife is not the only one.
Okay.
We have a question in the chat, and also I have another question, but I will ask first the one that it's on the chat. Andrew asks, which cartel has been the most dangerous to investigate?
All of them, actually all of them, because they have impunity. We don't know about what is the attorney at law in Mexico is doing about what are they investigate, because there is secrecy, and that's give the cartels impunity. We have to use all of our resources and all of our contacts to get the information. But in the government, there are still a few good men and women who work and investigate and want to bring justice to the people, and they give us information. But they put themselves in risk as us, because that information is not obtained but the official ways, because there's a lot of opacity in that matter.
My question is, in this sense, you presented us a context in which no matter the political party that was in power, there is always a constant threat to journalists in Mexico. But what would you say are the favorable changes that occur since the moment that you started in this profession until now in the context of journalism in Mexico?
I think we are in a cycle. Things were going in circle, because when I started doing journalism, I listened to my boss, Mr. Blancornelas, and he told me about how difficult it was for him to survive doing investigation in journalism, because the governments attacked him, and then the mafia attacked him. And then I was feeling like in the middle of the 90s, like, oh, these men and other ones suffer for us, and they open up the way for us, the new generation of journalists, to do it in a safer environment. But now we are like in the 90s. We are receiving threats from the government and threats from the cartels, and it is a circle. And no one. We have in the last 18 years, we have 3 parties in the national government, PRI, PAN, and now Morena, and neither of them have the compromise to protect the freedom of speech or to give justice to the people who suffer assassination, especially when it came through journalism.
We have other questions in the chat, so I will ask. Dr. Eko asks, what is the emotional reaction of these murders on you and other journalists?
Well, we have been passed for very difficult times, because we work with our partners, and suddenly they are not here anymore. They're being assassinated, and that is a very difficult situation. But that gives us courage to continue their work and our work towards journalism. It's very difficult, but we try to keep the way and keep doing our work in their memories.
Thank you. Nalani asks, how do you find reliable sources that lead you to your stories?
Well, as a journalist, you have to build your network of sources. I've been doing journalism for the last 31 years. In that time, I built that network of sources, people I can trust, because in the past we worked together, and especially when it matters to investigate the drug trade or the drug cartel, we have to have 3 sources to confirm one fact, and then we publish. If we don't have 3 sources of different environments, one source of the federal government, one for the municipal government, one from the state government, then we publish. If we don't confirm this information that way, we don't publish. We have to have one document, a photography, one testimony, one interview, something that proves that the things that they are saying to me that really happen in the way they say.
Here is a difficult question from Dr. Sternadori. She asks, I'm going to ask you an uncomfortable question, which is based on my personal experience as I investigate journalism in Bulgaria in the 90s. In addition to the risks that you all investigate journalists face, have you experienced threats of sexual assault, sexual harassment from sources and or bosses, or sexualized social aggression from colleagues? For example, spreading nasty rumors that you got a scoop by sleeping with a source. Are these sorts of experiences rare or common?
Not really. I don't know. I have been lucky. I not experienced sexual harassment. I think it's my personality and the personality of my newspaper that puts a barrier between our sources and us and I. But in this case, I stop the people immediately when I see something going through that way. And no, I have been lucky.
Dr. Eko asks, what are the Mexican journalists doing collectively to resist the threats you face?
As we said in Zeta, we made a network of protection. When we receive a threat, we first of all, we publish it. We said Zeta is doing journalism under threat. From the Arellano Felix or the Jalisco cartel, they threaten us for stop doing our jobs. And then we ask for the support of the organizations, international organizations who protects journalists like CPJ, like UNESCO, Article 19, Freedom Forum, the CIP, and they all united and make and denounce to the government to stop the violence against Zeta or against another journalist in Mexico. And we write about and we publish what is happening with one of us. And right now with the social media, that is more efficient. Just yesterday, the government of Baja, the state in which Tijuana is, attacked us in one of his public interventions. He said that we were helping one local political because we write something that he doesn't like, and he doesn't see his failures. He only sees that we are attacking him. We are not. But in this case, he said we were helping Jorge Hank, which is one of the main suspect of kill, not one, but two of my coworkers. And then I published that the government said that, and many journalists around Mexico and in the world actually support us. So we are a very supportive group.
Okay, yeah, I should to add a little bit to what you just said. I was watching Al Jazeera, the network of our first speaker, Zeina, and they did a report on the murder of a journalist in Mexico. So I found it very interesting that there's this international collaboration between the journalists in the Middle East who came down to Mexico, and when some journalists were killed, they did a report and they made it international. So our two speakers, like you and her today, there's that connection.
Exactly. We have many empathy with our journalists all over the world. We protect each other.
Very good.
Yeah, I think one thing that's come out of the two discussions, presentations and Q&A, is that there are sort of similar general threats, but the contextual circumstances are different. And then, I mean, I can imagine that collaborating and, you know, opening up dialogue could help on, you know, sort of tactics for recognizing problems and dealing with them, even though the contextual, you know, particularities might be a little bit different. And I think that's a value of having forums like this too, so that we can, you know, hear directly from each other. And along those lines, I'm wondering if you could offer some points of advice for the students to prepare themselves, not necessarily to work in the context that you are, which is pretty unique. And honestly, I don't think a lot of us would have the stomach for it. That's a lot of stress that you work under. But just generally, you know, to go into investigative journalism and have to, you know, speak truth to power and you know, be really persistent in the face of all these efforts to try to deflect, you know, what you're doing and keep the truth from coming out to the public.
Yes, they have to read a lot. They have to read newspapers, blogs, news portals, books, magazines, everything. They have to read a lot. They have to have the general context of everything, of your city, your country, your world, and they have to be skeptical towards the government. Don't trust the government. They are always lying. There is no middle point. They're always lying. So be skeptical and ask. Don't be afraid to ask and search. And search in every way, in everywhere. And listen to the society. That's very important. We said at Zeta, we have to be far from the government and near to the society, because they are the main reason that we do like what we do, that we do journalism, because they have to know what is happening with the resources, with the government, with their city. So listen to the society and be skeptical to the government.
One thing I might add, if I can assert that power, is you know, language. You've been speaking to us very, very clearly in a non-native language, and in order to do.
Thank you. I was nervous.
Muy bien hecho y todo muy clara. The point being that you're not going to be able to get that, you know, access to information and the confidence of sources, and to be able, you know, to work in some kind of a multilingual or multicultural context. So I think for the students, it's motivation to work on your your language skills, not only through formal, training here at the university, but there are all kinds of great ways to sort of improve your Spanish. We've got a good example with us, Dr. Cam Stone. I've seen his Spanish improve significantly over the last few years, just practicing. We text each other in Spanish as a couple of, gringos who are still struggling with the language. So I think, that's an important element for those of you who want to work in international, intercultural contexts as well. I'll step off the soapbox. Are there any final questions, or I'll turn it over to Dr. Eko?
Oh, okay. We want to really say thank you again to Adela Navarro Bello. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much for that very inspiring speech. You are it's an inspiration for us. When we read of the dangers that under which you walk, but then you persist, you insist on telling the truth. And thank you very much for the truths that you have told us today. We will arrange to get that award to you in Tijuana. We will talk behind the scenes. Gabriel, could you please post that picture again one more time? Let's just see that award that the dean is offering her. He is looking for it. Okay, there we go. The second one, the red one. So we are giving her the red with Dr. Wilkinson is holding there. That's the award for her courage and excellence in international journalism on human rights. And so we insist on that human rights angle because the work they are doing is the human rights work, talking about human stories and human realities and the human condition under very difficult conditions. Okay, congratulations again, congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us. Okay.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye.
Yes, have a nice day. Yes.
You too.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a little bit of time. We'll begin our the next session, which will be the student presentations. We, by Mike watch here, we are supposed to begin in about maybe 25 minutes. So we will take a little break. We are going to leave this session here. We are going to go to the second session, and you all have the address. Gabriel has the address, and you will link to that. And then we'll have the first student presentation, and then we'll have the second. Both presentations will run at the same time. And then when they have been done, we'll come back and we will have another joint session. And then we'll have our two respondents. Where I want to introduce our two respondents.